David Kepes appears on a TV show to discuss his book, detailing how Puritans of bygone eras suppressed much of American society's wildness. He remarks that true satisfaction in life often requires pursuit or marriage, choices he now regrets. Reflecting on his life later, David ponders his age and how it caught up with him upon meeting Consuela. Consuela, once his student, stands out with her sophistication and beauty. To maintain professionalism, David keeps his distance from students until grades are finalized, then hosts parties to connect with them. At one such gathering, David engages Consuela, noting her resemblance to a woman in an old painting and subtly complimenting her. He discreetly inhales her scent, a gesture she notices. As the evening progresses, David guides their conversation, driven by desire. She tells David about her love for opera, and since he reviews theater plays, he invites her to one. Later, while playing squash with his friend George, David recounts the event. George thinks he's trying too hard to win over Consuela, but David argues that she appreciates romance, like women did in the past. David jokes about George lacking imagination, despite being an award-winning poet. George jests back, suggesting David should remarry if he wants female company. David brushes off the idea playfully. At his home, late at night, he spends time with his friend Carolyn, but their conversation is interrupted by a call from his son, Kenny, whom he tried to reconnect with after his divorce. Despite their strained relationship, David admires Kenny's resilience as a doctor. Carolyn notices a play ticket and assumes David has stopped reviewing plays. David excuses himself, claiming he'll attend with George, but in reality, it's with Consuela. They go to the play, and afterward, Consuela praises it. David suggests drinks, but she feels uneasy about being seen with a celebrity. David downplays his status and invites her to his place instead. There, he plays the piano for her, and she appreciates his talent. She compliments him, and he responds with humor. David shows her his darkroom, confessing his struggle to adapt to digital photography. Later, they discuss artwork interpretations, and David leans in for a kiss, sparking more intimacy between them. The following day, he recounted his encounter with George, who quipped about Consuela sharing the details of their close encounter with her friends. David chuckled, remarking that he had at least exposed her to some culture. His friend marveled at David's luck with this fleeting romance, but David clarified it wasn't a one-time thing. During one of their rendezvous, he admired her body as if it were a masterpiece, sparking a discussion about their past partners. David had numerous, but he was surprised to learn she had only 5. She shared an intimate moment involving 2 men due to insecurity, a revelation that struck a chord with David, making him wonder if he had triggered similar feelings in her. From then on, David grappled with jealousy, frequently checking in on her and worrying about competition from men her age. In a conversation with George, his friend asked if Consuela made him feel youthful. David disagreed, likening their relationship to competing in sports against a younger opponent. George advised him to end things, pointing out his obsession and predicting Consuela's eventual departure. He suggested a romantic gesture as a prelude to the breakup. David took Consuela to the beach, intending to follow George's advice, but instead they discussed plans to visit Venice. He invited her to dinner, but she had plans to go dancing with her brother, a revelation that surprised David. He dropped her off at home but couldn't shake off his suspicion about her night out. Eventually, he succumbed to his doubts and visited the venue, encountering Consuela. He hastily excused himself, but she sensed his distrust, urging him not to sabotage their relationship and to start trusting her. When David shared the story with George, his friend chuckled. Despite being in love, David admitted feeling foolish, but found a strange comfort in the thought that it should be the end of their affair. However, to his surprise, Consuela extended an invitation to dinner. At the restaurant, she probed about their relationship, asking who she was to him, a question she knew would stir jealousy and prompt him to consider their future together. David confessed his apprehension about their age difference and the limited time he had left compared to her. In response, Consuela clarified that she was interested in what he wanted with her, implying a desire for a shared future. This conversation prompted David to reflect on his past pattern of quickly moving from one relationship to another, driven by a fear of being alone. Now, he hesitated to ask Consuela about her feelings for him. Meanwhile, Carolyn continued their sporadic intimate encounters, leaving David impressed by her confidence but longing for something more meaningful. When Carolyn discovered feminine products in his bathroom, she confronted him, citing her past experiences with infidelity. Despite their casual arrangement, she felt disrespected by David's actions. Fearing losing her, David lied, claiming the items belonged to George's temporary flings from his poetry readings. Carolyn saw through the lie, knowing David's meticulous nature, but he insisted that she was the only one he truly cared about. In his heart, David acknowledged that there was truth to his statement, at least in part. At lunch with George, his friend mused about the invisibility of beauty. George explained that often, people fail to see beyond the outer shell of beauty, missing the true essence of a person hidden within. David remembered a beach outing with Consuela, where he tried to capture her true self in photographs, beyond her stunning appearance. Developing the pictures, he admired her beauty, both in the images and in person. During a shopping trip, Consuela spotted George, a married man, kissing another woman in a restaurant. Disgusted, she expressed her feelings to David, who brushed it off, insisting it was none of their concern. Back home, David finally confessed his regret over marrying out of obligation. A year later, Consuela invited him to her graduation party, confronting him about his absence from previous family events. Reluctantly, David agreed to attend, feeling trapped. During his squash sessions with George, David fretted over the judgment he anticipated from Consuela's family and past lovers due to his age. George advised him to confront his fears. On the eve of the party, Consuela called David, emphasizing the importance of his presence and expressing her happiness. Despite her words, David sat nervously in his car with flowers. Unable to muster the courage to attend, he made up an excuse about his car breaking down and called Consuela to apologize. This deeply saddened Consuela, prompting her to end the call. When David returned home, he found a voicemail from her. In it, she expressed disappointment, feeling let down by someone she thought always had the right answers. She confessed her love for him and her expectation for him to be by her side on such an important day. As evening fell, David heard the doorbell and anticipated Consuela's arrival, but instead, it was his son Kenny. Anxious and restless, David confessed to Kenny about his affair. While Kenny initially seemed torn, he ultimately expressed his turmoil over being in love with both his wife and another woman with children. David, unsure of what to say, tentatively advised him not to disclose anything to his wife. However, Kenny had already confessed, leaving David exasperated. David suggested that Kenny end his marriage, but Kenny hesitated, fearing the repercussions on his family. David reminded him of his own departure from their family and argued that honesty was paramount. Kenny, outraged, questioned the righteousness of David's decision to leave them. David maintained that it was the honest choice. The next day, feeling dejected about Consuela's silence, David wandered the streets and beach, consumed by his emotions. One morning, David found it hard to muster the energy to leave his bed, but his loyal friend was there to serve him breakfast in bed. David lamented about ruining everything, but George reassured him that his relationship with Kenny had simply run its course. Despite feeling down, David insisted on his love for the woman. George consoled him, saying, "It's better to have loved and lost." In a tangent, George mentioned how he and his wife were rediscovering their relationship, prompting David to jokingly question if George was unwell before genuinely congratulating him. Then, George asked David for a favor. He wanted David to introduce him at an important poetry reading at New York University. Initially hesitant, David declined, citing his emotional struggles that hindered his ability to write or teach. George reminded him of the countless times he had been a sounding board for George's concerns about his son and other women, insisting that David owed him this act of friendship. Reluctantly, David wrote his presentation speech that night and delivered it eloquently the following day at the university. His words captivated the audience, but as George rose to speak, he suddenly collapsed, sending everyone into a panic. Days later, David visited George in the hospital. Although conscious, George was delirious and in pain, with his wife by his side offering comfort. David leaned close to his friend, acknowledging the debt of gratitude he owed him for their friendship. In a moment of confusion, perhaps mistaking David for his wife, George kissed him before passing away. Stunned, David gripped the wife's arm for support. That night, he joined the wife in mourning their loss. She questioned whether George mistook her for someone else, but David assured her that her husband knew her identity. Days later, during a lunch gathering with David, the topic of Kenny meeting the other woman's parents arose. David criticized Kenny's need for parental approval at his age, cautioning him against making a mistake. Kenny defended his actions, stating he didn't love his wife and questioned why his father left their family. David explained that he wasn't suited for married life and urged Kenny to let go of his resentment if he wanted his assistance. Before the conversation could progress further, David excused himself to attend George's funeral. After the funeral, Carolyn called David, expressing concern for his well-being following his friend's death. However, David found himself dwelling on his failed relationship with the younger woman, feeling like they were chasing an unattainable ideal. He confessed to Carolyn about the tampon she had found, revealing it belonged to a woman much younger than him. He lamented the lack of space he had in the younger woman's life and mourned the demise of their relationship. Later, Carolyn visited David's home, where she rambled about her experiences with online dating. David wondered if this was the first genuine conversation they had in their 20 years of flings. Carolyn reassured him, noting that even married couples sometimes lack communication after 40 years. As Carolyn prepared to leave for a flight, David offered to take her, but she declined, acknowledging that starting a relationship at this point wouldn't be wise. 2 years passed, and David eventually came to terms with Consuela's departure. He threw himself into his work, conducting radio interviews with fellow authors. Close to New Year's Eve, he received an unexpected voicemail from Consuela, requesting a conversation about something important. David's mind raced with assumptions, pondering if she was getting married or facing something worse. Finally, he gathered the courage to call her, only to discover that she had been nearby all along, waiting for his call. Consuela visited his home, her appearance altered by a short haircut necessitated by an impending surgery that could alter her appearance. She confided in him about her panic and the decision to seek solace with him instead of attending a party. Overwhelmed with emotion, David sought comfort in her embrace, questioning why she hadn't informed him sooner. Consuela, in turn, admitted to feeling older and regretful for taking her life for granted. She then made a significant request of him to photograph her body before the surgery, preserving her beauty. David prepared his camera and the room, capturing her bare essence delicately. Following the intimate session, Consuela challenged him about his willingness to remain intimate with her, even if she were disfigured. Shocked, David hesitated, prompting her to admit her fear of facing the ordeal alone. Now, in the present moment, David gazes out the window, reflecting on the journey that brought him to this point, fully aware of the complexities and challenges that lie ahead. The following day, David meets with his son, who happens to be an oncologist at the same hospital where Consuela is undergoing surgery. Kenny updates his father on Consuela's condition, reassuring him that she's in capable hands, as he's familiar with the surgeon overseeing her operation. David is taken aback, as he thought the procedure was scheduled for 2 weeks later. However, Kenny explains that her illness necessitated immediate treatment. Aware of his son's busy schedule, David decides to leave after inquiring about Kenny's family. Kenny responds tersely that they're still together. David silently acknowledges his son's commitment to his family. Reflecting on his recent experiences, David clutches Consuela's photos and recalls his conversation with George about the invisibility of true beauty. George had questioned whether David truly saw Consuela's inner self, a notion David remains uncertain about. Soon after, Kenny calls to inform David that he can visit Consuela. Ignoring the rain, David hurries to her bedside, where she reveals that she underwent a mastectomy. David attempts to comfort her, but she expresses her fear of losing his interest now that she no longer possesses the same physical allure. In a surprising turn, David joins her in bed, pledging to stand by her side and cherish the present moment instead of relentlessly pursuing superficial ideals.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and stay connected with us.